questions I get asked, and we got asked this afternoon, is why are these people targeted when they go back? Well, the head of the Independent Human Rights Commission, Muslim Modi in Afghanistan, put this very simply. By the act of leaving, they are seen by those in the insurgency in particular to be sympathetic to the West, to perhaps be in cahoots with the foreign forces, to be perhaps converted to Christianity. And so they are targeted for those reasons. Moreover, the security situation in the country is deteriorating to such a degree at the moment. This is different to the narrative you will hear from some of the coalition politician leaders, as opposed to troops on the ground. They tell you a different story. That things are getting better now, so we can withdraw the troops. That's a narrative to justify that. This is very similar to the removal of American troops in Vietnam, no job done. And we know what the outcome of that was. According to the Human Rights Commission, that just 15 minutes down the road to Ghazni, which is only 100 kilometres from Kabul, safety can't be guaranteed. The director's comment to us was if we were to drive just 15 minutes from where we are sitting, which would take us probably over in North Sydney Station. If you were to drive 15 minutes from where we are sitting right now, I would be killed and you would be kidnapped. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Ramadi, the head of the peace talks on behalf of the government, he was assassinated. When we were there, we were staying at a place across the road from, they said, it was the safest place in all of Afghanistan, the Interior Ministry. And in the Interior Ministry, 2 US colonels were killed by Taliban operatives. So if people within the Interior Ministry cannot be protected, if the head of the reconciliation and peace talks cannot be protected, how is it possible to protect people who get sent back when we know that the Karzai government cannot protect its own citizens? Because, how do we know that? Because more civilians died in Afghanistan in the last 12 months than have died any previous year. So this situation is rapidly deteriorating. You won't read about it in the Murdoch press unless it's written by Amanda Hodge. During the time we were there, the US forces burned copies of the Quran, and the city protests have resulted in violent clashes. 40 people were killed by US forces and Afghan forces. A few days later, if you didn't read in the papers, the US drone missed its target, destroyed a civilian house, killing 4 children under the age of 7. And then, of course, soon after that, we saw the US soldier slaughtered another 16, mainly women and children, in Kandahar. Again, I refer to the words of Engineer Mohammed Yusuf, who said to us, I'll read the quote because it's the voices of the people are the part that's missing in all this. He says, I wish the international community would bring some change to the government of Afghanistan. We need some positive change, and we need people to be able to trust the government when that change happens. Things are so bad now that a lot of people are saying we better have had the Taliban back. There's no justice in the country, there's no system of justice. The international community has the power to enact, to enable positive change, but they haven't done it. What many of the forces have done is to divide the country and to make the division worse. Many people internationally do not realise that many ministers in the Karzai government have residences overseas. Every time there's a sorry proposed by the US for the damage that they have done, it happens again. And then he said, if a government sends its young to fight and to die, and you spend your money, and yet the people of the country ultimately hate you, what have you done? A soldier from Australia, the son of an Australian family, and the son of an Afghan farmer both lie dead, killed in an Afghan field. Who wins here? We saw the Qurans burned by the US forces at Bagram. Again, they say sorry. Every time they say sorry. Politicians say sorry. They say sorry again. When mistakes are made, they say sorry once more. But sorry will not bring your son back. I think there's a couple of things we have to learn from this. One, any return to the processing on Nauru is fundamentally flawed. Fundamentally flawed. There was no checks or balances, there were no possibilities of review, there was no habeas corpus. We can't do that again. We've got one side of politics opting to do it again. It can't happen. The politics of division that we see at play here is simply not historically, we've seen what Malcolm Fraser did when faced with the far greater dilemma of those people coming to the country post the Vietnam War. Fraser got together with Bill Hayden, then opposition leader, and they got Mick Young, and at the end of the feed, they travelled around the country to say that there was nothing to be feared from refugees. At the same time, they increased the quota to 20,000, which in those days per capita was, cranking it up in the mid-30,000s now. They went into the region and they worked with the countries of the region, particularly using the camps that were there, that are still there, as potential bases where people could be processed. And they did that, and over an 8-year period, 2 million people were resettled. It was a much bigger problem than we've got now. So there's a solution at hand. Politicians don't want it. And at the end of the day, I guess my final plea is that unless we learn from the sins of our history, we're bound to repeat them. And I guess in the spirit of landscaping our Gaelic land, is to say, what is it about us and people who come by boat? Most people who come to this country seeking asylum come by plane and land to Sydney Airport. I don't hear Alan Jones tomorrow morning screaming that Sydney Airport needs to be shut down. Something about us and people who come by boat. Malcolm Fraser thinks it's got to do with racism. And he says very simply, we wouldn't do this to boatloads of white Zimbabwean farmers, would we? Go to Villawood, you don't see too many Irish backpackers, these are overstayers. Who are the illegals? We do see lots of Afghan people who've already been traumatised. And just last month, we heard the Psychiatrists Association of Australia and New Zealand say there's a new issue, a new syndrome. It's called asylum seeker syndrome. That has to do with the mental illness that is perpetrated upon people when they come to be seeking protection. My final vision on this last report, last visit to Afghanistan, was that Mohammed Karim Rizai, who was walking away. He said, look, just tell people in Australia, I haven't lost my hope and I haven't lost my heart. It seems to me if he's still able to think like that, then we in this movement need to redouble our efforts to do whatever we can to see that justice is done to these people. And if our politicians aren't up to it, if our community leaders aren't up to it, if our church leaders aren't up to it, then for God's sake, the rest of us got to do our utmost to be up to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Well, I knew it was going to be sobering, but it's quite a lot to take in what Phil said. Can I invite anyone to ask questions? Is there anything you'd like to ask Phil?